Dearest Nightingale readers, I hope you are well and safe. If you aren't, I hope everything works out well for you soon enough. Hang in there. Today, I bring you a tale of a turnaround of fortune, all born from a single act of pretense. Snow slammed against the ballroom windows like a warning, but Caroline of Coventry barely heard it over the thunder in her chest. She stood frozen, because the whispers behind her cut sharper than any winter wind. Why is she here? A poor relation, clinging to noble scraps. Lady Hargrave should not let charity cases attend her Christmas gatherings. Caroline kept her chin up, though her throat burned. She stayed near the wall, half hidden behind a marble pillar, where the candlelight could not fully expose her plain gown or trembling hands. The ballroom glittered gold silk, jeweled masks, chandeliers dripping with crystals. Yet she felt like a shadow in a world built for stars. A discarded scandal sheet on a nearby table caught her eye. The Duke of Ravenshire's political marriage imminent. Another reminder of the world she would never belong to. Then the room shifted. A ripple, a hush, a tension that pulled every gaze to the entrance. Jayden of Birmingham, Duke of Ravensshire, stepped inside, cold, tall, severe. Power clung to him like a second coat. The air around him tightened as if even the snow outside dared not fall too loudly in his presence. He had a reputation. Aloof, strategic, unyielding. A man raised for thrones and war councils, not warmth. Caroline looked away too quickly, but he had already seen her. Their eyes crashed into each other like two storms meeting. For a heartbeat, she forgot the whispers, the cold, her insignificance. He looked at her not with pity, but with an intensity that made her breath stumble. She turned, pretending interest in a vase of winter roses. It didn't matter. She knew better than to stare. He was a duke. She was nothing. Yet footsteps approached. Steady, certain, aimed at her. Caroline's heart tripped. She kept her gaze down, hands clasped tight, hoping he would pass. He didn't. "Miss Caroline of Coventry," he said, his voice deep enough to settle between her bones. She stiffened. "Your Grace." He studied her as though she were a puzzle he intended to solve. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was something else there, something searching. "You are alone," he said simply. It wasn't a question. Caroline swallowed. "I prefer quiet corners, Your Grace." His gaze flicked to the ballroom crowd. Bright, loud, vicious. "Wise," he muttered. A dangerous silence stretched. The orchestra played on, but she felt as though the music had hushed only for them. Without warning, he stepped closer. Close enough that she caught the faint scent of cedar and winter smoke. "Miss Caroline," he said, low and controlled, "I require a fiancé." Her breath vanished. "I beg your pardon? Just for tonight." His tone was sharp, decisive. "There will be eyes watching, politics moving, enemies whispering. I need someone the room will not suspect. Someone honest. Someone who won't seek advantage." Her heartbeat thundered. "Your Grace, I don't." "You will stand beside me," he continued. "Dance with me, smile when needed, and leave with me when the night ends." Caroline stared at him, unable to speak. Why her? Why not the glittering ladies spinning across the marble floor? Why choose the invisible girl in the shadows? He seemed to read her confusion. "You caught my attention," he said, voice deepening, "because you were not trying to." Caroline's pulse fluttered wildly. She had no title, no wealth, no reason to be chosen. "Why me, Your Grace?" she whispered. Jayden's jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes. Not softness, but desperation disguised as control. "Because," he said slowly, "you are the only one in this ballroom who looks at me without expectation." The words struck her like a blow. He extended his gloved hand. "Say yes." The music swelled behind them. Laughter rose. Snow battered the windows. But all Caroline could see was his outstretched hand, Dangerous, powerful, life-changing. She hesitated only a second. Then she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, claiming. A gasp rose from nearby guests. Whispers erupted. The ballroom shifted again, this time because of her. Jaden leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "From this moment," he murmured, "you belong beside me." Caroline's heart trembled. And then, he gave the command that chilled and thrilled her all at once. "Do not fall in love with me." Caroline had never known she mattered, not truly, not in a way that made her feel alive. And yet, the first time Jaden's piercing gray eyes settled on her, something inside her shifted, fragile and undeniable. Her chest tightened, her heartbeat echoing in her ears, as if it were shouting reminders she had long silenced. She could feel, she could want, she could be seen. Around them, the ballroom roared with music, laughter, and whispered judgments. But for Caroline, it blurred into a muted haze. The glittering gowns, the polished floors, the crisp scent of winter air brushing through open windows, all faded into insignificance. The world contracted until there was only him. Every careful step he took toward her, every faint tilt of his head, drew her in like gravity, leaving her trembling with anticipation she could neither name nor control. He stopped just a few feet away, his shadow falling over her like the weight of a winter night. A subtle gesture of his hand invited her to a quiet corner near the grand fireplace, and she followed, legs heavy, heart light-headed with a mix of fear and curiosity. The firelight flickered across his features, cutting sharp lines and soft shadows, revealing a hint of something human beneath the composed, impenetrable mask he always wore. "I assume you know why I have chosen you," he said, voice low, deliberate, each word wrapping around her like a cloak that was both suffocating and thrilling. Caroline swallowed hard. The truth was, she did not. She had guessed. Whispers, rumors, scandal sheets. But to hear it spoken aloud made it painfully real. I only know what others have whispered," she admitted, her voice fragile, nearly a breath. Jaden's gaze held hers, intense, assessing, and unyielding. "Then allow me to be clear," he said, each syllable measured. "I require your cooperation. One night, a single charade, and one rule." He leaned ever so slightly closer, his presence both dangerous and intoxicating. "Do not fall in love with me." A nervous laugh escaped Caroline, sharp and incredulous. "You expect what of me? That I will pretend. While my heart—" She stopped herself. The words sounded absurd even as she felt their truth. "Exactly," he said quietly, as though reading the very fear behind her hesitation. "You will perform the part of my fiancée, not the part of a woman in love." Her fingers clenched the skirts of her gown. The rule should have made things simple, yet it sparked rebellion in her chest. Every instinct screamed against it. Every brush of his hand during dance rehearsals, every lingering look in his study, every quiet word that carried warmth beneath its authority. Her body and heart refused to obey. Still, a spark of courage, long dimmed but never extinguished, flared within her. She lifted her chin, meeting his unyielding gaze. "Then I shall obey your rule," she said, voice steady despite the fluttering of her pulse. "But I cannot promise it will be easy." His lips twitched ever so slightly, the closest thing to a smile she had seen. "I do not doubt it," he murmured, and the low vibration of his words sent an impossible shiver down her spine. That evening, in the privacy of his study, the rehearsals began. Caroline learned the precise tilt of her head, the careful placement of her hand, the perfect poise for society. She obeyed meticulously, yet her mind betrayed her at every turn. Each brush of his fingers sent a thrill racing through her. Every lingering gaze pulled her closer to a dangerous edge. Every whispered instruction seemed to hum only for her ears. Jaden, for all his cold calculation, revealed subtle cracks. He lingered when correcting her posture, allowed a faint smirk at her missteps, spoke in tones so soft and deliberate that she felt his words vibrating through her. His fortress of composure had small openings, and though she feared what lay behind them, she could not resist peeking in. Later, in the quiet candlelight of her temporary room, Caroline lay awake, mind and body alight with a dangerous awareness. The echo of his command, "Do not fall in love with me," haunted her. The warmth of his hand, the faint scent of cedar and musk lingering on his coat, the unspoken invitation in every glance, they all called to her, daring her to break her own resolve. And yet, beneath the fear, a determination stirred. She would navigate this charade, survive the season without scandal, maintain her dignity. She would obey, even if it broke her heart. But deep down, she knew, pretending was already impossible. Something was growing, undeniable and fierce, a slow-burning fire that threatened to consume them both. The snow fell silently outside, each flake a witness to the fragile promise she had made, to the Duke and to herself. For the first time in her life, Caroline felt seen, truly chosen, and that awareness carried with it a delicious, terrifying possibility. What would you do if the person you feared and desired most asked you to step into a world of pretense, and your heart had already betrayed you? Caroline's chest hammered as if it might betray her secret thoughts to the cold December air itself. The firelight flickered across the polished floors of Ravensshire House, but it did little to warm the icy knot coiling in her stomach. She had imagined many things about this night, quiet observation, polite avoidance, but never this. The Duke himself standing before her, the weight of his eyes pressing into her as if they could see every unspoken fear and desire she carried. "Do you understand what I am asking of you?" Jaden's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, low, controlled, and sharper than the frost creeping along the window panes. Every word landed with precision, leaving no room for evasion. Caroline swallowed, her fingers tightening on the hem of her dress. She did, she thought, but she also didn't. She understood the surface. Play the role of fiancée for one night. But beneath that, the currents of danger, expectation, and, most perilous of all, desire threatened to drag her under. "Yes, I believe I understand," she said, her voice trembling more than she wanted to admit. "One night, a charade." Jaden's eyes never wavered. "Exactly, but one more thing. There is a rule, a single absolute condition." He leaned slightly closer, the faint scent of cedar and musk drifting into her senses, almost intoxicating. "Do not fall in love with me." Caroline felt a laugh rise, bitter and nervous, only to be swallowed in her throat. Her heart, traitorous and foolish, thudded against her ribs like it had its own plans. Do not fall in love with him. How could one obey a command that seemed already impossible? She faltered, words catching in the icy air. "You expect me to pretend while my heart—" She stopped, shivering from more than the chill, the absurdity pressing down on her. "Precisely," he said, eyes sharp and unwavering. "The heart has nothing to do with it. You will perform the part of my fiancée, not the part of a woman in love. Do you accept?" Her stomach twisted, a combination of fear, longing, and disbelief. What if my heart refuses to listen? But Caroline found a spark of defiance she hadn't known she still possessed. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with as much steadiness as she could muster. I will obey your rule, but it will not be easy." A faint, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth hinted at something she had not seen before, an acknowledgement or perhaps amusement. "I do not doubt it," he murmured. His voice was a low promise and a warning at once. Moments stretched in silence, heavy and deliberate, before Jaden gestured toward the grand fireplace. "Then let us begin." His tone left no room for argument, yet somehow invited her into the perilous intimacy of the plan. As they rehearsed the simplest motions, a hand held just so, a curtsy measured and precise, Caroline became painfully aware of every brush of his fingers against hers, every lingering glance. Her pulse raced with the tension between duty and something far more dangerous. It was not love, she told herself. Could not be. It was only rehearsal. Yet the rehearsal betrayed her. Each subtle touch sent a shiver down her spine. Each word he spoke softly near her ear vibrated in a way that made her knees feel unsteady. She tried to recall all the lessons Lady Hargrave had drilled into her about invisibility, about staying small, about fading into the background. But Jaden's presence was a gravity she could not escape. He remained precise, calculated, almost unreadable, yet Caroline caught cracks in the armor. An unexpected tilt of his lips when she faltered, a pause that lingered too long on her face, a shadow of warmth in his otherwise icy eyes. Each sign, subtle and fleeting, made her wonder whether he too felt the perilous pull she could not deny. When the evening drew to a close, Caroline retreated to her modest room at Lady Hargrave's townhouse. The candlelight cast trembling shadows on the walls, but it could not chase away the memory of him. The echo of his command, "Do not fall in love with me," looped in her mind, wrapping around her heart like a chain she did not want to break. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quiet the betrayals of her own pulse. Every instinct rebelled at the thought of pretending, of standing beside him while feeling every beat of her own desire. Yet within that rebellion, a spark of courage lingered, small but defiant, reminding her that she had survived worse shadows in her life. She would navigate this charade. She would obey the rule. But her heart, her reckless, foolish heart, had already begun to betray her. And somewhere in the corridors of Ravensshire House, beneath the glow of candlelight and the whisper of velvet drapes, a slow-burning storm began, dangerous and intoxicating. A storm that promised to see her, to test her, and perhaps, if fate allowed, to choose her in return. What would you do if the person you feared and desired most asked you to step into a world of pretense, knowing your heart had already betrayed you? Caroline's fingers ached from gripping the carriage rail so tightly that the leather straps had left impressions on her palms. The snow whipped around the wheels like shards of glass, stinging her cheeks and biting at the edges of her gloves. Her heart thundered, not from the cold, but from the brush of Jaden's arm against hers as he steadied the carriage through the icy streets. Every movement felt too intimate, too charged, too impossible. He noticed, of course. His gaze flicked toward her, gray eyes assessing, calculating, unreadable, yet brimming with that quiet intensity she could not forget. She had learned, painfully, that in his presence, even a casual touch or a lingering glance could ignite a tempest inside her chest. She forced her hands to rest in her lap, trying not to let her pulse betray her, trying not to betray herself. "Steady," he murmured, low and clipped, though there was an edge to it that made her pulse spike even more. Not the wind, not the cold. Him. Caroline swallowed, knowing she would have to navigate this day like every other in this delicate dance of pretense. Lessons, carriage rides, and social exposure. It all felt like stepping along a razor's edge. One false step, one breath too heavy, and everything could collapse. And yet, despite the fear, a part of her, a dangerous, foolish part, wanted more. She wanted to feel the brush of his arm, the heat of his proximity, the thrill that came from being chosen in the smallest, quietest ways. That afternoon, the Duke's study had become both a classroom and a crucible. He instructed her on the proper carriage of her head, the precise angle of her wrist, the art of subtle flirtation that would be convincing to the prying eyes of society. His hands occasionally hovered near hers, not touching, not quite, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Do not forget the poise in your step," he said, his voice brushing over her like a soft command. "Even if your thoughts wander." Caroline bit her lip, cheeks burning. His words were meant as instruction, but they carried a subtle weight, a dangerous undertone that made her wonder how much of the Duke's attention was strategy, and how much was curiosity, perhaps even desire. As the days passed, the closeness between them grew. Candlelit rooms, late-night lessons, whispered conversations in the library. Each moment was a test, Each brush of fingers an unspoken question neither dared to answer. She found herself counting his silences as carefully as his words, memorizing the cadence of his voice, noting the subtle shift in his posture whenever she spoke her mind. Yet danger loomed. News of the Ashfords' growing suspicion filtered into their world like poisoned mist. Whispers in the hallways, the sharp edge of gossiping tongues, the ever-watchful eyes of high society. They were predators circling a fragile prey. Caroline felt the old familiar weight press against her ribs. Invisibility had protected her once, but now her visibility, her every breath, her every smile was under siege. Jaden's responses were equally dangerous. He became possessive in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. A hand lingering longer than necessary on her elbow. A tightening of his jaw when another man's eyes lingered on her. A low warning murmured when she misstepped in a polite greeting. She wanted to deny the way it thrilled her. Wanted to pretend it didn't make her stomach twist with longing. But it did. One evening, beneath the hush of a snow-muted Ravensshire garden, she stood too close, frozen by fear and desire alike. His hand brushed hers as he adjusted a sleeve, and for a heartbeat, everything in the world narrowed to that moment. The distant crunch of snow underfoot, the scent of evergreens mixed with his familiar musk, the flicker of lantern light, all faded. Only him, only the heat between them, only the unspoken rule that neither dared fully name. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke, as if confessing a truth she was not ready to claim. I am trying to be enough." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he held her gaze, eyes sharp but somehow softer than she had ever seen. The pause made her chest tighten painfully. "You are," he finally said, low, deliberate, leaving the words hanging between them like smoke curling in candlelight. And then, as if fate or mischief intervened, the moment shattered. A sudden knock at the garden door, a voice from the shadows. His mother, no doubt, cut through the delicate tension. Caroline stepped back, flustered, heart hammering as she realized how exposed they had become, how quickly danger could intrude upon even the smallest moment of intimacy. Jaden's hand lingered for a fraction longer than necessary before he withdrew, leaving a phantom warmth that Caroline could not shake. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken emotion and suppressed desire. He turned to meet the interruption, composed, controlled, a duke through and through, but the shadow of what might have been lingered in the space he had left behind. Caroline exhaled shakily, the thrill of the forbidden mingling with fear. The Ashford schemes were coming closer, but so too was the ache in her chest, the pull of a heart that refused to remain obedient. Every glance, every fleeting touch, every whispered instruction drew her deeper into the dangerous orbit of the Duke, a world she should navigate with caution, yet could not resist. She wrapped her gloved hands around herself, fighting the shiver that was not entirely from the cold. Her heart whispered what her mind dared not, that she was no longer invisible, that her fate, and perhaps her heart, was entwined with him in ways she could not yet name. Would you risk everything for a forbidden closeness that burns with both danger and desire? Caroline froze mid-step, her breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself against the heavy velvet drapes of the study. The sound of her own heartbeat pounded louder than the voices drifting from the hallway. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but curiosity had betrayed her, and now the words that floated to her ears were a dagger aimed straight at her fragile sense of security. "Must ensure that engagement never proceeds." The sharp, commanding voice of Jaden's mother cut through the quiet. "The woman is unsuitable, a liability to the estate. The people must not see weakness in the Duke." Caroline's fingers clenched the fabric so tightly that the seams threatened to tear. Her stomach lurched. Unsuitable. Liability. She had thought she had been merely a pawn in a polite charade, but to hear it spoken aloud, with such cold certainty, drove a chill straight through her bones. She should have left. She should have turned, fled, and taken the knowledge with her in silence. But she could not. She needed to hear more, to understand the true stakes of this dangerous game she had agreed to play. If he continues this charade, it will ruin him. The voice continued, lower now, almost conspiratorial. He cannot be allowed to choose sentiment over duty. His heart, too fragile, too reckless. He lost once already, and he cannot bear it again. Caroline's pulse stuttered. Her mind raced back to the glimpses of vulnerability she had caught in Jaden's eyes. Moments so fleeting and careful, yet so devastating in their honesty. He had loved and lost, and it had left scars that he wore like armor. The weight of that loss now pressed against her, intertwining with the fear and desire that had been simmering between them. A sudden movement made her gasp. Jaden entered the study, the door closing behind him with a definitive click that left her trapped between revelation and fear. His gaze swept the room, sharp and commanding, but the fraction of hesitation that passed across his face did not escape her. He had not expected her to be here, to overhear what should have remained secret. "Caroline," he said, low and steady, but not without a tremor of something unspoken. "You should not be here." She swallowed, forcing the words out, fragile and trembling. I heard everything. About the plans. Your mother." His jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, he looked every bit the Duke. Controlled, composed, a fortress built of duty and fear. But then, in the depth of his eyes, she saw it. Vulnerability, raw and unshielded. The echo of a man who had once lost and feared losing again. "You shouldn't have heard that," he murmured, almost to himself, voice low and pained. "It is not your burden to bear." "And yet, it is," Caroline whispered back, her courage bolstered by the need to reach him, to touch the man behind the title. "Because I care whether I should or not. Because I cannot stand by and watch you be torn apart." The intensity of her words seemed to shake the air between them. He stepped closer, every movement measured yet charged with a magnetic gravity that made her knees weak. "Caroline," his voice softened, almost breaking, and her heart clenched painfully at the sound. "You must understand. I cannot promise you safety. Not here, not in this world, not with me." She looked up at him, eyes wide, unflinching, because she had glimpsed the truth in his glance. The man behind the Duke, human, fragile, desperate. "Then let me share it," she breathed, voice trembling but fierce. "Let me stand with you, even if it means danger, even if it means heartache." A silence fell between them, heavy and electric, broken only by the faint crackle of the hearth. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, the barrier of pretense seemed to crumble. Desire, fear, and unspoken longing surged, threatening to consume them both. Then, almost imperceptibly, he closed the distance, hand reaching for hers. The touch was tentative, reverent, and in that simple brush of fingers, the world shifted. The air between them pulsed with heat and forbidden possibility. Caroline's chest tightened as he whispered, "I should not," but the words were lost in the charged silence, the moment stretching beyond reason. Her pulse echoed in her ears, and every instinct screamed that this was wrong, reckless, dangerous, and yet utterly irresistible. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, cold and indifferent, as if warning them of the storm to come. Inside, a different tempest brewed, one of hearts tethered by desire, danger, and the impossibly thin line between obedience and surrender. Caroline's breath caught. Her mind screamed caution, but her heart, defiant, trembling, alive, had already betrayed her. Would you risk everything for a forbidden kiss, knowing it might ignite a fire you cannot control? The morning paper hit Caroline like a physical blow, landing with a harsh crack on the polished wooden floor of her small chamber. She stumbled back from the desk, eyes wide, stomach twisting, as the headline mocked her in bold, merciless letters. "Social climber seduces the Duke, scandal rocks London society." The words burned, echoing in her mind louder than the whispers she had always feared. Every cruel accusation, every snide comment she had endured as a poor relation now crystallized into one searing, undeniable truth. She had become the target of every society matron's scorn, every gossip's cruel delight. Her hands trembled as she picked up the paper, scanning the text that twisted her private moments into public humiliation. Every stolen glance with Jaden, every whispered conversation in candlelit corners, every brush of his hand during lessons in etiquette had been twisted into a lie, a weapon wielded by those who wanted to destroy her. Caroline sank into the edge of her modest chair, chest tight, as if the walls themselves were closing in. How had it come to this? One charade, one pretense, and the world had turned against her. She felt the weight of the entire season pressing down, threatening to crush the courage she had fought so hard to summon. Meanwhile, in the shadowed halls of Ravenshire's house, Jaden's composure cracked like fragile ice underfoot. The scandal sheets had spread like wildfire, every noble household buzzing with gossip, speculation, and judgment. His mother's expression, when he confronted her, was a mask of cold fury, but he knew the blade hidden beneath. She would cut him off from the family legacy if he did not renounce Caroline immediately. "You've let her drag you into this shame," she hissed, eyes sharp with ambition and fear. "Do you not understand what you risk? The estate, the alliances, your name." Jaden's fists clenched, knuckles white beneath the fine gloves. "She is not a liability," he said through gritted teeth, every word a blade of defiance. "She is the one person who has ever mattered to me beyond duty or expectation." His mother's glare could have frozen rivers, but he did not flinch, not even now. Yet beneath that veneer of control, a storm raged. He feared what the world's judgment would do to Caroline. He feared the whispers, the ridicule, the venomous letters she would surely receive. And most of all, he feared his own helplessness in protecting her. Caroline, at the same time, had made her decision. The night had been long, sleepless, and tortured by the echoes of laughter she had never been invited to join. Her fingers clutched the edges of her skirts, the tiny spark of courage in her chest now blazing into resolute sacrifice. She could not, would not, let Jaden bear the weight of her presence in a world so cruel. She packed quickly, every movement trembling with grief, determination, and heartbreak. Letters of explanation were unnecessary. Her absence would speak volumes. She would remove herself from the battlefield, taking the risk upon her own shoulders, sparing him the torment of scandal and society's judgment. By the time Jaden returned to the townhouse that evening, Caroline was gone. A note, scrawled with urgency and a hint of trembling ink, lay on the dressing table. "I do this to protect you. Forgive me." Jaden's breath caught as he read it. His chest tightened, and for the first time, the control he prided himself on slipped. The room spun around him as fury, fear, and despair collided. She had left, not because she did not care, but because she cared too much. Because she loved him enough to risk everything on a silent act of bravery. He clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms, as he sank into a chair, heart pounding with helpless rage. How could she leave when he had vowed to protect her? How could she shoulder the burden alone, and yet, in that very act, prove the depth of her courage and love? The snow fell silently outside, each flake a cold witness to the devastation of hearts torn apart. Caroline's absence was a void in every shadowed corridor, every candlelit room, every echoing step of the Duke's own chamber. And yet, amidst the ache, Jaden realized a truth as bitter as it was beautiful. She had not abandoned him. She had acted out of love. The world had turned against her, society had mocked her, and Jaden's mother had threatened their future. But Caroline's sacrifice was undeniable, and in that revelation, fierce and painful, he felt the first spark of resolve ignite. He would not allow her bravery to be wasted. He would fight for her, For them, even if the world itself conspired to keep them apart. Somewhere beyond the frost and the gossip, beyond the threat of scandal and the crushing weight of duty, hope flickered. And Jaden knew, with every fiber of his being, that he would not rest until Caroline returned to him, safe, and finally seen for the heart she had so courageously laid bare. Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved to protect them, even if it shattered your own heart? Caroline's hands trembled as she slammed the letter onto the polished mahogany desk of Ravensshire House, the proof of the Ashfords' treachery pressed between her fingers like a burning coal. Every muscle in her body screamed urgency, her breath ragged from the dash across the frozen courtyard. The halls were empty, the household still wrapped in the quiet lull of early evening. Yet the silence only heightened the weight of what she carried. This was no longer a matter of charade or pretense. This was the truth, and it demanded action. Her mind raced. She had uncovered the carefully orchestrated campaign that had shattered her fleeting sense of peace. Forged letters, bribed servants, whispered lies in the drawing rooms. Every scandal that had threatened to undo her and Jaden had been set in motion by the Ashfords. Her chest tightened at the thought, a mixture of fury and despair threatening to collapse her resolve. She could almost hear the echoes of gossip that had once followed her, the cruel laughter, the pointed whispers. And yet, here she was, armed with clarity and the undeniable proof that Jaden had been betrayed, not by her, but by the very society that claimed to uphold decorum. She paused outside the Duke's study, her knuckles whitening around the envelope. Jaden's door loomed before her, imposing, elegant, a barrier she now felt desperate to cross. Each breath she drew was sharp and cold, a reminder of the winter evening outside. Yet inside her chest, her heart burned with the knowledge that delay would cost them both dearly. She had to see him. She had to set him free from the lies that had kept them apart. When she finally entered, Jaden stood with his back to the fireplace, eyes fixed on a sheet of papers he held, oblivious to her presence at first. The soft glow of the fire threw shadows across his face, accentuating the tight line of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows. He did not turn as she approached, but she could feel the tension coiling around him like a living thing, and it was enough to set her pulse hammering against her ribs. "Jaden," she said, voice firm despite the tremor she felt inside. "I know the truth, about the Ashfords, about the letters, the whispers, everything." He finally looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the barrier between them cracked just slightly. His eyes, gray and stormy, softened at the sight of her determination. "Caroline?" His voice was low, cautious, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. "I thought I had lost you by choice." She took a step closer, the envelope still in hand. "You never lost me. I left because I had to protect you, because I could not let them use me against you." Her words tumbled out, a mix of pleading and resolve. "And now I have proof, evidence that everything was orchestrated to separate us, to destroy us both." He crossed the room swiftly, his long strides closing the distance between them in moments. Jaden's hand hovered near hers, then took the envelope, scanning the documents with sharp, decisive eyes. The fury that lit his gaze was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure, the kind of power that made the world bend to his will. "They will pay," he said, jaw clenched. "Every last one of them." Caroline felt relief and fear intertwine. Relief because the truth was finally in his hands. Fear because she knew the storm that would follow. But Jaden, the season, the ball, society. Her words trailed off, realizing the enormity of the confrontation that awaited them. He reached out, gripping her hand with a strength that both startled and reassured her. "Caroline, enough. For too long I allowed them to dictate what we could be. I allowed them to decide who I could care for. No more. You will not leave my side again. Not because of fear, not because of duty, and certainly not because of lies." His thumb brushed against her knuckles, sending a shock straight through her, grounding her in a truth she had feared too long to embrace. Her chest heaved with emotion, her heart fluttering wildly against the cage of her ribs. "Jaden," she whispered, I I've waited for you to see me. Not the charade, not the whispers, not the lies, but me. Only me. He drew her closer, the space between them collapsing in an instant, and Caroline felt the tension of the past weeks. The humiliation, the fear, the longing, pour into a single, electric heartbeat. Then you shall have me, he said, voice low, determined. Every part of me, and I will not let anyone take you from me again. Not the Ashfords, not my mother, not society itself. In that charged silence, their foreheads nearly touching, Caroline understood that the rule, the command not to fall in love, was no longer possible. Their hearts had defied it long ago, entwined in a dangerous intimacy that neither could deny. The firelight flickered across their faces, painting them in shades of warmth and longing, a world apart from the gossip and cruelty outside. Caroline's lips curved in a tentative, fierce smile. Then we faced them together, she said. Jaden's grin was almost feral, triumphant. Together. And in that moment, beneath the weight of betrayal unveiled and the storm of society looming, the first spark of unshakable hope ignited between them. The battlefield was set, the stakes higher than ever. But now, finally, they would stand as one, hearts aligned, ready to reclaim what had been stolen from them. What would you do if the one you loved risked everything to protect you, even when the world conspired against you? The doors of the grand ballroom slammed open with a force that silenced the gathered guests. All chatter froze mid-laugh. All eyes turned. Jaden strode in, his presence magnetic and formidable, the very air bending around him as though the walls themselves acknowledged his command. The chandeliers trembled under the echo of his entrance, and the orchestra faltered, unsure whether to continue. Every whispered rumor, every stolen glance, every concealed weapon of gossip in the room seemed to vanish under the weight of his intent. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. She had arrived early, unsure, nervous, each step toward the ballroom like wading through thick fog. But now, seeing him enter with the storm of authority he carried, her entire body thrummed with a combination of fear, awe, and longing. He scanned the room in one swift motion, eyes locking on her, and she felt a shiver that was not entirely cold run down her spine. This was no longer a charade. This was war, and he was her champion. He moved with precision, each stride deliberate, his gaze cutting through the sea of masks and gowns. The Ashfords sat stiffly at the far end of the room, their polite facades crumbling beneath his scrutiny. Whispers started again, tentative and nervous this time, as if the assembly had realized that they were now spectators in a story they could neither control nor escape. Ladies and gentlemen, Jaden's voice rang out, low and commanding, every syllable measured and sharp as a blade. The time for lies, for schemes, for whispered malice has ended. His eyes briefly flicked to Caroline, holding her in the center of his storm. And it begins with the truth. Caroline's pulse hammered in her ears. She had rehearsed this in her mind 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared her for the force of it in reality. The room seemed to shrink around them, each guest aware that the confrontation would not be subtle, that it would not be polite, and that it would demand their full attention. He held up the letters, the evidence she had delivered to him days before, letting the candlelight glint off the seals and creases, exposing the web of lies that the Ashfords had woven. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Duke's mother stiffened, her eyes narrowing, as the faintest flicker of fear crossed her carefully constructed expression. Jaden's mouth curved into a sharp, controlled line, the faintest trace of satisfaction beneath it. These documents, he continued, prove that the Ashford family attempted to manipulate my household, my reputation, and the woman I chose to protect. Caroline felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. She had imagined this confrontation countless times in solitude, imagined herself trembling under the weight of society's scorn, and yet now, standing beside Jaden, she felt shielded, chosen, and fierce. He lowered the papers, turning fully to face her, and in that instant, every heartbeat between them seemed to synchronize. "Caroline," he said, voice soft but unwavering, The only woman I will ever choose, his hand lifted, gesturing to her, is you. A hush descended over the ballroom, broken only by the faint clinking of glass as a servant recoiled in surprise. Shock registered on faces once smug, once confident, as the room collectively processed the audacity of his declaration. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others stared wide-eyed, unable to look away. Caroline's heart threatened to leap from her chest. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a lifetime of longing, misunderstanding, and restraint. He approached her, and the world narrowed to the space between them. Every whispered insult, every threatening note, every cruel observation of the past weeks vanished. He took her hand in his, the warmth of his palm searing against her cold fingers, and drew her gently into the center of the ballroom. Candlelight flickered across their faces, highlighting the stark contrast between her delicate features and his formidable presence. "Do you understand?" he asked, his lips close enough that she could feel the faintest heat of his breath. "No Ashford, no society, no rule will ever come between us again. I will protect you. I will choose you." Caroline swallowed hard, the tightness in her throat giving way to a tremulous smile. I believe you," she whispered, voice barely audible over the collective intake of breath from the room. And then he leaned forward, slow, deliberate, and the kiss that followed shattered every restraint, every rule, every careful pretense. It was fierce and tender, urgent and deliberate, a declaration more powerful than any words could convey. She melted into him, into the warmth, into the certainty that she was finally seen, finally chosen, finally safe. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, and the room seemed to exhale in unison. Caroline's eyes glistened with unshed tears of triumph. She had survived the scandal, the lies, the fear, and now she was free to love, to be loved without compromise. Jaden's lips curved into the ghost of a smile, his hand still enclosing hers. "Together," he murmured, a vow and a command all at once. The guests slowly regained their composure, but their attention never wavered from the two figures standing at the heart of the ballroom, radiant with power, love, and victory. Outside, snow drifted softly against the tall windows, a silent witness to the storm they had weathered and the promise of the future they would face. United, fearless, and unstoppable. What would you do if the one you loved declared you worth fighting for in front of the entire world? The first snow of winter fell in thick, swirling flakes, coating the cobblestones of Ravensshire House in a blanket of pure white. Caroline's breath came in short, exhilarated gasps as she stepped outside, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, yet unable to guard against the thrill coursing through her veins. Tonight was not just another night. Tonight was the culmination of everything she had endured, the whispered insults, the nearly unbearable pretense, the moments of longing and fear. Tonight, she would no longer be invisible. Jaden emerged behind her, the crunch of his boots on the snow announcing his presence before she even felt him. He reached for her hand, his gloved fingers warm against her icy skin, pulling her close. There was no fanfare here, no audience. Just the two of them, the snow falling like confetti in a world they had claimed together. His eyes, the same stormy gray that had first unsettled her in the ballroom, held nothing but certainty, devotion, and a hint of mischief. "You stayed," he said, voice low, a rumble that vibrated through her chest. "After everything, you stayed." Caroline swallowed, words caught in her throat, because she had not just stayed. She had fought, endured, and dared to love despite the fear that had clawed at her every step of the season. "I had to," she whispered, fingers tightening around his. "Because leaving you, it felt like losing myself." He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles as if sealing a promise. "And yet here you are," he murmured. "Not as a shadow, not as a pretense, but as yourself. The woman I chose before society, before scandal, before duty." Her heart threatened to burst. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Snow falling, cold biting at their cheeks, the world holding its breath as they stepped into a new life together. And now it was real. Real, tangible, and more terrifyingly beautiful than she had dared dream. Jaden stepped closer, lowering his forehead to hers, letting the snow swirl around them unnoticed. "Caroline," he breathed, "I never wanted a pretend fiancé. I never wanted a role or a charade. I wanted you, only you, and I will spend every day making sure you never doubt that again." A tremor ran through her at the sincerity, the rawness in his words, the weight of every sacrifice, every stolen glance, every night of longing finally vindicated. She could see the honesty etched in his features, the vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness, and it made her chest ache in the most exquisite way. She began, but words failed. There were no words adequate for the storm of relief, love, and joy that had overtaken her. So instead, she closed the distance between them, pressing into him, into the warmth that had become her anchor through the coldest, loneliest days of her life. Their kiss this time was unrestrained. It was not a cautious testing of limits, nor a stolen moment in the corner of a crowded room. It was claiming, proclaiming, a collision of two hearts that had survived deceit, danger, and doubt. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on as if letting go could erase the months of pain and longing they had endured. His hands cradled her face, thumbs brushing against her skin in a gentle, intimate rhythm that made every nerve sing. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads resting together, Caroline's breath mingled with his, her cheeks flushed, her eyes glistening. She dared a smile, trembling but triumphant. We did it," she whispered. "We made it through everything." Jaden's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile, the kind that softened even the sternest lines of his face. "Yes," he murmured. "And now nothing, no family feud, no society, no scandal, can take this from us. You are mine and I am yours. Forever." Her heart soared at the word forever. For once, she did not feel the weight of invisibility pressing down on her chest. She felt light, free, untouchable in the knowledge that she was chosen, loved, and safe. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that glittered like the first frost of winter. Caroline's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely as he knelt before her in the snow, unashamed and unabashed. "Caroline," Jaden said, voice steady but filled with emotion, "will you marry me, not for appearances, not for pretense, but for us? For the life we choose together?" "Yes," she breathed, the word bursting from her heart before thought could temper it. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and the cold metal felt impossibly warm, a tangible promise of the life they would now build. He rose, pulling her into an embrace that made the world shrink until it was only the two of them, the snow, and the bright, blinding joy of love realized. Above, the sky opened, a snowflake landing delicately on her cheek, and Caroline laughed, pure and unrestrained, as Jaden kissed her again. There was no fear, no shame, no pretense. Only the certainty of love that had survived every test, every rule, every whispered word. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that had become her anchor. "I never thought I'd be seen," she whispered softly. "But you saw me, truly saw me. And I will never stop seeing you," he replied, voice rumbling with promise. "Not now, not ever." The snow swirled around them like a silent witness to their triumph, a quiet applause for the victory of love, courage, and resilience. Caroline held him close, feeling the warmth seep into every part of her, knowing that this was the life she had longed for, the love she had risked everything to embrace. "What's your next move, my duke?" she asked playfully, her fingers entwined with his. "Every day," he said, lips brushing hers once more. "I choose you." And in the falling snow outside Ravenshire's house, with the world still spinning and the night alive with possibility, Caroline finally understood what it meant to be truly, irrevocably chosen. Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Tell me below. Which part of this love story hit you the hardest?